Lesley and Ted Rosenthal. Together, they have created the jazz opera Dear Eric, which will have its world premiere at the New York City Opera on January 9th through 13th. Lesley wears many hats, I know, because I sit with her on a board and in the state bar. She also serves as the chief operating officer at the Juilliard School. And Ted is an award-winning jazz pianist and composer. The dynamic duo has created what's been called a poignant and moving story in Dear Eric, which is based on letters written in Germany between 1938 and 41 by Ted's grandmother, Hertha, to his father, Erich, a Jewish scholar who escaped to the United States. The opera is co-produced by the National Yiddish Theatre Folksbiene, which we've featured in past City Watch segments, and will be playing at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. And Lesley and Ted, welcome to City Watch.
Thank you so much, Edwina. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thanks, Winnie.
So, I already said that I've known Lesley in some of her other hats. I'm not surprised that she has co-written a libretto for an opera because I associate Lesley with music. The first time I saw her was at the installation of a state bar president where she played the violin. And I was just in awe of you, Lesley, and I remain so to this day, many years later.
Thank you, Winnie. It's mutual.
When I read your Facebook posts starting a couple of months ago about this opera, it just really resonated with me. I know it's based on some 200 letters written by your grandmother, Ted, to your father. When were these letters discovered? Have they always been in the family, or was this a fairly recent discovery?
Well, the letters were received by my father by virtue of his being able to attend the University of Chicago on a fellowship, and that's the way he was able to escape Nazi Germany. He received these letters, he documented and saved them very methodically, and they sat in a box of the house that I grew up in Great Neck, Long Island, but he never discussed them, he never discussed their contents, and after he passed away, almost on a lark, I decided to take the box, which was in an attic in our house, and basically move it to the attic of the house I live in now. So they were just really sitting unread because they were in German, and I didn't read them. And we were invited to my grandmother's hometown in 2015. It's a small town near Frankfurt. It's a town called Bad Camberg, Germany. And the townspeople very graciously invited the Jewish descendants of the town to attend a ceremony of a refurbished Jewish religious school. And for some reason at that point, I thought, well, let me get these letters out of the attic, and maybe they might be interested in reviewing them and translating a few of them. And that was sort of the rediscovery of the letters.
Wow. So when did you decide to turn these into this opera?
Well, I have to say that Dr. Peter Schmidt, who is the co-head of the Camberg Historical Society, who graciously offered to translate these letters. Once I started to receive the translations, the revelations were quite profound, quite moving. I was learning about a family that my father barely discussed, almost never discussed. And if we asked him a question, we would get only the shortest of answers, which is quite typical of survivor guilt and survivors of experience like that. So as the letters started to come in, the revelations were just so profound and moving that I was starting to be moved to do a creative work based on both the story and both just the intense feelings I was experiencing by these revelations I was having.
What does it feel like to share such a personal, intense family history with the world?
Well, it's been a very interesting process because at first it was much more of a literal, the characters are my father, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, even me, my sister. But as the story started to develop and the libretto started to develop, and in consultations with people in this world and developing the story, there was beginning to be a lot of dramatic license being taken, a lot of poetic license, a lot of things that were done that you could say are informed by facts in history, but in fact were not actual facts in history. Mm-hmm. So to amplify the drama and to make the best story possible, they began to just come characters. And so I have a good deal of distance.
So you have to
now.
Detach yourself to a certain extent.
Yeah, so sometimes the person that loosely is me is kind of a jerk, and I'm okay with that.
I'm sure that's not, you're never a jerk, Ted.
Well, you'll have to see the opera and decide.
So now, I don't want you to give too much of the story away, because I hope that our listeners will have the chance to go and experience this. So you talked about, why your father left and the scholarship he won. And is there anything else, without giving too much away, that you could share about this story?
Yes, well, of course, another dramatic challenge when you're doing a story, or in this case an opera, dealing with the Holocaust, is basically, people kind of know how it ends, because the history is so clear in that regard. But there are elements of the story, even a couple, you could almost say, magical elements of mystery, and one of the themes of both the opera and, again, informed by real life, is that my father never knew what happened to his mother. I mean, he knew she perished, but beyond that, he didn't know, and clearly that had great ramifications for him in terms of his suffering through that experience. So in the opera, we deal with that, and there's some mystery and some solved mystery in that regard.
Wow. So fascinating. Lesley, so you co-wrote the libretto, correct?
Yes, that's right. It's been a real privilege to have been by Ted's side as this both personal and artistic journey has unfolded. We began our research inadvertently, really, at the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington. I was teaching a course at Georgetown Law, and Ted came with me to Washington. He went to the museum for a visit, and we found ourselves at the end of the day in the reference room, and he typed in his grandparents' name into a computer, and all of a sudden this information about them appeared, their photos. He looked strikingly like them, their address, his grandmother's maiden name, date of birth, and also, very tantalizingly, the date of her deportation, and more information about her demise than his father had known. And that really sent us both to Germany to meet the people that were memorializing the lost Jewish community, but also to a great deal of research. And since I'm a lawyer by training, as you know, I dove particularly into the areas of her efforts to immigrate into the United States, which were ultimately frustrated, and I learned about what the continuing obstacles and the continually rising obstacles to her immigration were. In fact, we wrote a whole song together just on that very topic, and of course, with great resonance to this day.
Wow. So that was your first visit to the Holocaust Museum, then?
It was, but they have since become, of course, very interested in this piece. I think it's important for the future generations to learn about the Holocaust in new ways, and to try to set it as a work of art with a jazzy score to depict the parts of Eric's new life in America and Chicago, the sounds of freedom and democracy, in contrast to the sounds that his mother was hearing in Europe. I think we can help to bring a very well-known story to the attention of a new generation in a fresh way.
So is this the first work that the two of you have collaborated on together?
I guess you could say yes, in addition to our life collaboration. Yes, Lesley heard me play many of these songs that were songs, and then was inspired to write words to them, and then we continued to craft the story. There's a lot of what I call interstitial music. It's music's top to bottom, which is part of what makes it an opera. And when people ask me about, what does that really mean, a jazz opera, I do point to...
That was my next question,
yeah.
So yes. I know Porgy and Bess.
Right. Well, and in fact, Winnie, that's exactly the example I give, because as a jazz musician who loves to play songs from the Great American Songbook, Gershwin being one of the chief exponents of that, Porgy and Bess is really a great example of something that's operatic in its dramatic nature. It's operatic in the fact that it's music from beginning to end. But there are 8, 10, 12 wonderful songs that people perform to this day as songs with vocals, as instrumentals, all arranged in all kinds of ways. And that's really the loose model of Dear Eric. So people, I'm hoping, will walk out of the theater humming any number of, songs that are melodic and tuneful.
So I'll just jump in here and
say
that, Gershwin is a real inspiration to us. And also when you listen to the score, you'll hear influences of Leonard Bernstein, but you'll also hear Miles Davis, and you'll hear Herbie Hancock. I mean, this is I think it's an American genre. I feel like Ted has really pushed the genre of jazz opera forward with this work, and we're really hoping to break artistic ground as well as telling a relevant story.
Lesley, you had started to say a little bit earlier, a little bit about why you think this is such a relatable story. As I said earlier, I read some of your posts on Facebook, and really it was almost like a punch in the stomach. It just sort of hit me. What do you think it is, even though it's set 80 years ago? What do you think makes Dear Eric so timely in 2018, 2019?
Well, Winnie, I got to say, we've all read the history books about the Nazis' rise to power, and in theory we've learned these lessons. We know how it ended, as Ted said, but the power of these letters for me, and what I'm hoping the opera can share, is Herta's week-by-week narration of her experiences. The walls of hate were closing in on her. The Holocaust didn't start with death camps. It started with propaganda. It started with cartoons in newspapers and progressed then to taking laws away, civil rights, like the right to practice law, the right to be a teacher, to marry whom you love, or even sit on the same park bench together. And I see this story as bringing to real life that process. Hate never goes away. Fear of the other never goes away. People are running for their lives even today. And we have to stand guard in every generation. And we're hopeful that this work of art can help us bridge our differences and create empathy and enable us to tell our stories in ways that others can hear.
How can our listeners find out more about Dear Eric and getting tickets for this, and also what's next for your amazing jazz opera?
Sorry, we are losing you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Now we can. Yes.
Okay. I was just asking you if you could share with our listeners how to find out more about Dear Eric how to get tickets, and also what's next after your premiere in January.
Well, Dear Eric is being premiered January 9th, beginning January 9th for 4 performances by New York City Opera in co-production with the National Yiddish Theatre Folksbiene. The performances are at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, which is at 36 Battery Place in Lower Manhattan. And you can go to the New York City Opera website, www.nycopera.com, for tickets and information about the show. And after that, we are looking at potential performances. I just received an outreach from an organization in Denmark, and it looks like we're going to do a version of Dear Eric in Copenhagen in early June. We've got some showcases at a few Jewish, the Center for Jewish History in May, and a number of other irons on the fire. So we're hopeful that this is going to have a long and productive life for the piece.
Can you say the website one more time?
Yes, New York City Opera's website is www.nycopera.com.
Thank you so much. And I wish you great success with your premiere in January, and I look forward to hearing more about Dear Eric. Have a great weekend.